JC Race Talk fans, great to have you back with us. Another episode here. I'm pretty excited about this one. And I'll tell you why. I moved to Kansas City in 2006, so I'm always hearing stories. Well, you remember the I-70 days, or you remember the old Lakeside days. Well, I don't, because I wasn't here. So anytime that I can learn about that, I'm pretty excited about it. So our guest today has a Facebook page called Racing KC. You guys, a lot of you follow it. I know you do. But I'm super excited to have today our guest, excuse me there, raced from 1989 or 88 through 94 with 4 feature wins in the Charger class. Was in 1991 NASCAR's True Value Gold Wrench Award winner for the Midwest region. Became an official in 1995 when Clyde Ellis called Bob Baker and told him not to let Green get away from racing. In 1996, became competition director at Lakeside Speedway and I-70 Speedway after a NASCAR race at I-70 Speedway. And been doing it ever since. And I'd like to say 30 years this year as a competition director. My guest today, JD Green. JD, man, thank you so much for coming and spending some time with me. We're going to talk about the history of racing in Kansas City, and we're going to do this, once every 4 to 6 weeks, just as kind of a regular ongoing show, if you will. So, again, thank you, JD, for joining me. I hope I did that introduction credit, if you will, because you're a Hall of Famer, and I just want to show you the same respect as you deserve, buddy. So this week, we're going to talk about Old Lakeside and Riverside. So, JD, what is your earliest remembrance of, and I'll say Riverside first?
I'm glad you said Riverside first because we lived over by the Avondale area and we made Riverside almost every Saturday night. We made Lakeside probably 3/4 of the time. And I say we, it was me and my dad. My uncle raced in southern Missouri. That's where I got the bug at 6 years old, sitting behind the steering wheel of his race car. And like all little kids, it's like you dream one day of being a racer. Um, and I got to tell this story real quick. 13 years old, and you know how we are at 13 years old. Maybe most of you don't, but we start challenging our folks. And in this case, I challenged my mom, and I got sent to basically timeout. Go to your room, son. And then Dad comes in and says, "We're not going to the races tonight at Riverside until you apologize to your mother, and you got 30 minutes to do it." Well, at the 29-minute mark, I went and apologized so we could go to the races. So, and the neat thing was where we lived, which was over by Avondale, probably a couple miles from North Kansas City Hospital. You could, if we weren't there, we could hear the races. We could hear the race cars. They'd come right up what is now 169 highway. And so if you weren't there, you're like, why aren't I there? It was a every Saturday night ritual for us, and just loved that track. But I loved Lakeside too. We'd go to Lakeside, and that was kind of like a special because I loved the half miles. So great memories. My goodness, great memories. And I think I might have sent this to you, but one of the things Riverside had a fenced in pit area with wood planks. And you know how wood planks have knots in them? Well, as a kid, you loved looking through there to watch the cars. There were times Dad would be almost to the ticket window and holler at me to get up here, son. So, loved Riverside, loved Lakeside.
Well, and we had some great racers, and I'm going to say generational racers come out of the days of Riverside and the old Lakeside. One that comes to mind to me is Tom Charles. Tom told me a story once about how he was running a late model at the time, was at Old Riverside, and they DQ'd him before he even rolled off the trailer. Because he'd been winning so much, they said, "Oh nope, you're DQ'd." So it's amazing how in Kansas City, and we've all heard this, Kansas City racing is family, and it's amazing how it's impacted families like it has throughout the years.
Very, very true. And here's the interesting thing about Tom Charles. Of course, I was a fan for a long time. Like you said, I didn't start racing until 1988. I was 30 years old, and I gotta thank Diana for that, because we offered to buy a race car. They gave me the weekend to think about it, which was Memorial Day weekend, and they had to offer it to somebody else first. And anyway, my wife the whole weekend was like, "You need to buy that. You need to buy that." And I said, "Well, you know, it's going to change our lives." We didn't know how it was going to change our lives at the time, but Tom Charles and I are about the same age. And so I've always thought of him as one of the younger racers from that time, because you go back, there are some great racers that have made Hall of Fames that were my dad's age, and my dad's now 90. So
Well, I mean, there's definitely. I mean, you've got Bud Honeycutt, and I mean, you got all those guys that even some guys that raced at Olympic Stadium that then went to Riverside and then on to Old Lakeside. Now, not to get off of Riverside, but the Old Lakeside is not where it sits today. It was where the Woodlands was, correct?
correct. In fact,
Yeah.
my first year, 1988, was at the old Lakeside. And of course, being a rookie, really not knowing everything, kind of like you moving in here in 2006, not knowing everything, and everybody in the pit starts talking about, "Yep, this track's going to the dogs, going to the dogs." And I'm like, "What the heck are you guys talking about?" But 1988 was a big year in Kansas City, because that was the last year of both Riverside and Lakeside at their, well, it was the last year for Riverside, period, and Lakeside at its old location.
Gotcha. The what there was some greats at the old Lakeside, like Gene Claxton, still racing today. I never seen that place, never heard. Tell me a little bit about the old Lakeside. Did it have the heel feature? Did it have what was the grandstands? I mean, was it comparable to the iconic Lakeside that is now off of Wilcott in KCK?
Well, yes. In fact, if you grew up around the old Lakeside, the new Lakeside, as we call it, or used to call it, you're right. That's the iconic Lakeside now, but that's where the hillside spots came from. They had basically two levels of hill spots at the old Lakeside, and it really was at that time first come first serve. So if you wanted to get that lower level, you better get your spot, get there early. But then the grandstands were beautiful too. Um, and usually we sat in the grandstands. There was a few times we sat on the hillside, but when it was Dad and I, and later on when it was Diana and I, we would sit in the grandstands. And even years later, when you're a young couple starting out, um, at the old Lakeside, we'd send our boys to pick up all the cans after the races. Of course, we didn't realize we were helping the track at the time, but we were doing it so that we could go buy the aluminum goat and buy next week's ticket.
Well, whatever it takes to get to the races, you know. Um, the what are some of the other big names that you remember coming out of the old Lakeside? I mentioned Gene Claxton as one of those, been racing 53 years, 54 years now, I think. But who are some of the other guys you remember racing there?
Terry Bivens is probably the biggest name, because Terry, uh, you either liked him. He had kind of a Dale Earnhardt complex early on. You either liked him or you didn't, and but he won a lot. And of course, then he tried to make it in NASCAR, actually leading a lap in
Actually
1976
made
at
it.
Daytona. Yeah, kind of got ripped off on the Rookie of the Year thing, but I understand there's politics all through racing, all levels. But Terry Bivens was probably the biggest name because he was moving on up. But you had Dave Wall um, and the Kosiskis when they came down. They were dominant. And to back up to Riverside just for a second, for a little bit, the thing about Riverside is it was a mixture of the open wheel versus the stock car crowd. There were there was people on both sides, and back then people really weren't. You're an open wheel fan, ugh, or you're a stock car fan, ugh. So Riverside was a great mixture of that because they had both the super modifieds and and the stock cars, for lack of a better term, before we started dividing it up into the way we divided up racing over the years. So
Yeah. Well, and I don't think a lot of people. I mean, in that time period, the super modified was the open wheel class. I remember my grandfather running that class at Godfrey Speedway and Tri-City Speedway over in the St. Louis area. So I remember those days. And you're right. I bet it was very interesting seeing those two. And I think it's a little like this today. There are definitely sprint car fans and open wheel fans, and then there are definitely late model fans, and then there's the fan that, hey, I don't care what it is, I just want to see it race. The what? Not to change the subject, but what do you think? Being a race director for 30 years now, your 30th year, what do you think the biggest change in racing has been? Is it, I mean, because we're not, it's proven we're not getting faster. The cars are about the same. And I say cars they're different, but time-wise, they're not much different. Purses aren't much different. There's lots of things that aren't, if you were looking at it from a spreadsheet, ain't much different. But what do you think has changed the most?
you're not going to really like my answer, but I think greed has created a lot of this uh, over the years. And I say that from many, not just money wise, but I want to win. And I can't win in an A mod because the A mod's got priced out. So let's create a B mod. I can't win in a B mod. So let's create a E mod. Oh, wait a minute. I can't. And from every class, then it gets split. Even the E mods. Um, you got the Midwest mods. Do you allow this? Do you allow that? What about this mod? And that's the greed I talk about. If we could just get back to, and you mentioned the spreadsheet, if you just had one modified class and you take all three of those purses and put it into one purse, then there's no complaint over the purse. But the complaint comes back to, I can't win. And that's
Yeah. Well,
honestly, until we conquer that, and that's going to be a big one, And then the other thing that we got going on, and I was thinking about this before you and I got on, because I see this as I've got 5 grandsons and a granddaughter that are growing up. Youth sports has taken so much. I mean, I've got a grandson that's in baseball. He's in a baseball tournament in Arkansas this weekend. So they're not going to a racetrack. I've got another grandson that's in the soccer tournament in Springfield, Missouri. They're not going to the racetrack. And so they grow up not being that little kid at 13 years old that his parents can use Riverside Stadium against him because they're busy every weekend in some kind of sport. And it doesn't really matter. You can name the sports, and it takes the child's time away from, and really, we've got to get kids back to the racetrack.
Well, I agree with you 100%. And I will tell you, and culture is culture. We all know how things have changed. But kids nowadays, I remember my Uncle Dennis was my Superman. He drove for my grandfather, and I just worshipped him because he just was bigger than life. And boy, that's all I ever wanted to be. Matter of fact, he was, when I won my very first feature at Lakeside Speedway, he was my very first phone call. And so I get it. And I think the racetracks that are recognizing that, I-35 being one of them with their kids mods, Valley Speedway with his bus rides that he does with the kids. I was down at Nevada Speedway here a couple, 3 weeks back, and they've got a kids mod class that they've started. So I think that the sport is recognizing that we're a dying breed, and that we've got to keep going there. With that being said, who or what? Because and you're right, Terry Bribbins, and I'm going to work on Terry. I'm going to try to get him on the show, even if I have to go down to Lebo, because there. He did lead a lap of the Daytona 500. Come on.
Yes, he did.
Yeah, and so I mean, talk about a legend. Definitely a legend, and we had a lot of those guys. I mean, Clint Boyer out of the Kansas City area, and I was just having a conversation, and you can probably agree with me on this. I watched racing in several areas all over the country. And I don't know if there is a better caliber and better racers than what we have here in the Kansas City area. I think we have some of the best. I think Gene Claxton could have been a superstar with the right brake, or a John O'Neill with the right brake. At I-70 back in the day, it was nothing. Well, one of the coolest pictures I ever seen was Davey Allison getting in Doug Richards' car to come race at I-70. So the history in Kansas City is just amazing. A.J. Foyt winning his very first feature at Olympic Stadium. I mean, so there's so much here in Kansas City. With that being said, who and what would you... I'm trying to think how to word this. Who was the one guy that didn't get the shot back from that 60s, 70s, 80s when you were a fan, before you got involved with racing? Who was that one guy that didn't get a shot that, boy, was a talented race car driver?
Well, first off, let me say you're correct. There were so many talented drivers that have come up and didn't get that shot. And in a roundabout way, yeah, I'm gonna do a little politicking here, but NASCAR needs to watch this. But the guy that deserves to be in their Hall of Fame that didn't get the shot, but he didn't want it, was Larry Phillips.
Yeah, for sure.
For sure, Larry. I mean, when I won that Gold Wrench award, Larry was mouthing while we're on stage getting our awards. He was mouthing something to us, to me, and I asked him afterwards, after the banquet was over, what he was saying, and I can't repeat the words he was saying, but basically he didn't expect that wrench that came on the plaque to be in my toolbox next year. It was supposed to be hanging on my wall. But Larry Phillips didn't get the chance. Um, Technically, really, I don't believe Terry Bivens got the chance, but I've heard stories that he might have wasted some opportunities. Um, and that happens. I mean, that's life. We all look back and go, "Dang it, I wish I hadn't have done that." So, but Terry Bivens, I really thought was going to go somewhere. I really thought Gene Claxton had a shot at going somewhere if he had got the right break. John O'Neill through the years, Rick Beebe even, and Rick
Mm-hmm.
made it quite a ways because he got to race at Kansas Speedway in what used to be the Busch Series, whatever, O'Reilly, I guess now.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Yeah.
but Rick's got he made some great contacts along the way. And by the way, I'll tell you, you need to get him on this show. But you better
Absolutely.
account for 2 or 3 or 4 hours because he will talk.
Yeah.
But anyway,
Well, there was a Rick. There was a certification as you went up through the field, and Rick Beebe was one of those guys. Because I was talking to him one time, and he was telling me how him and Jimmy Johnson was one of the guys that went through his time, and I'm like, "You're talking 7-time NASCAR champion?" And he goes, "Yeah, he had to go through the class just like everybody else had to." I don't know exactly what it was called, but I remember him talking about that.
that was the good old days of the ASA, and Jimmy
That was
Johnson
what it
and
was.
Kyle Busch both had to go through that. And you're talking some of the best at the top. Um, and we all look at NASCAR as the premier division, I guess. Everybody wants to make it up there. But some people along the way say, hey, I enjoy where I am at. I enjoy winning where I'm at. And Larry Phillips being one of those. But here's another person I would love to see you interview sometimes if you could get him on the show is James Ince, because James Ince was Larry Phillips' crew chief for a while, and then he made it all the way to my very first Daytona 500. Diana and I, thank you, Terry and Vicky Watland, for inviting us. We're sitting there, and um, Johnny Benson was his driver, and they were leading the Daytona 500 when a yellow came out. They didn't need the yellow because then they got ganged up
Oh,
on. But James Ince could have won as a crew chief the Daytona 500 in 2000.
wow. Well,
But
well,
all these racers
I
come
mean,
from this area.
yeah, though it's crazy the the amount that has come through this area. Um, just it's just astonishing, actually. Which leads us to some of the best racing I've ever seen. Um, and I will tell you, in '06, when I moved here, I met Doug and Jake Richards was the first people I met. I didn't know anything about the area. It was my second year of racing. I had said, well, hey, I seen a race car outside their shop. And I stopped and I said, is there a race car track around here? And Doug goes, there's one of the best half-mile racetracks in the country. And I went, no, come on now. I've been to Eldora. I've been to Knoxville. Surely not. And boy, was I wrong. And the racing was just over the top. Seen some, I can't imagine what it was like in the I-70 days when it was asphalt, with some of those 50, 60, or 50 to 150 lap races that went on there. And then the people that come out of there, Jamie McMurray, another one that came out, that raced there a lot at I-70. So just the history is over the top. With that being said, one of the things that, and fans, if you're not following Racing KC on Facebook, which is JD's Facebook page, some of the articles that you put up, especially when you're inducting somebody in your Hall of Fame, I have learned a ton. What did you feel like you needed to do that to keep history alive and bring the younger generation into that history to where they can appreciate it being on social media?
That's a big part of it. First off, I've always loved history. In my college class, I was one of 3 people that got an A out of 120. So I've always loved history, but I feel like there are times that we don't keep up with the history even locally. Bob Libby did a great job. I inherited 2 things when Bob Libby passed away. One was his record keeping, which he kept records for many, many years and even researched it. Most of the stuff around the Kansas City area, if you look on Wikipedia, it's good through 2013, 2014 because Bob kept it up. But I feel like we keep these stats, but then they just disappear. And when you look back, you want to look back and see that. And perfectly honest, I was a little perturbed because of the Central Auto Racing Boosters Hall of Fame. I felt like, and I've been inducted, and I appreciate that. I remember getting it started. I remember the meetings we had at our house back when we lived in the Gladstone area. But I was driving through Riverside and I saw E.H. Young. And I thought, Ed Young was the owner of Riverside Stadium. He was really the owner of a lot of Riverside, Red X, and one the first mayor or first, And I thought, you know what? We need to honor people like that. And and to be honest with you, the owners of the tracks sometimes get taken for granted, but they're giving us a place to race. And I know one of our big topics that we all racers like to talk about is we need to get all the owners to get on the same page. They're not going to do that when they're in competition in business. So um, we do that. But anyway, that I came home that night, and that's when I wrote Ed Young. And then I was like, well, Clyde Ellis is all the Ellis family is always going to mean a lot to me. Um, so and then I really didn't know all their history until you become part of it. They go back to the kids were putting the seats together at I-70 Speedway when remember the old bucket seats. Well, Joan and Clyde had their kids out there putting them in, and you start researching it, and it's like, please don't lose history. Let's keep the history going. I appreciate what Ray Cunningham does, but again, we're back to the open wheel versus Ray's very definitely an open wheel person. So, and I don't have a problem with that. Keep racing alive. That's what I want.
Yeah.
And I really want the kids to see it. And here's the big thing. In Daytona this year, we met up with a group uh, for Terry Ford. And they're like, we really want to get him in the Hall of Fame. Well, I write these for Racing KC. Now, if somebody wants to get somebody into the Carb Hall of Fame, they got to go through the process of filling out the form. I don't care if they take that document that I wrote and submit it as their record of proof. Because I do have fun when I contact these people. Hey, what's your story? Now, some of the old guys are like, I don't have any stories. Well, so then you got to do a little research of the pit crews that were with them or whatever, because there will always be a story. But and again, I know we started with Riverside and Lakeside. I'm going to throw my hat in the ring for Haas Harkness. He was the last promoter at Riverside when it closed, but he was also an announcer. And in those days, he wore a hat just like uh, Hoss Cartwright. That's how he got the name Hoss from Bonanza. And he did a great job of announcing and everything else. And so, and the great thing is, he realized he's getting old. Heck, I'm getting old. Heck, you're getting old and you're just a kid when you think about it. And that's the one thing I really wanted to say. The stories that have come out in the Riverside days of the casters, Dixie Castor,
Yeah.
I didn't realize this, but she was known for her chili dogs back then. She was also known for answering the phone, telling us, "Yeah, we're still racing," even though she's in a ticket booth and it's raining outside. So,
Well, it's sad. It's sad because I will tell you that every time I walk into the new Lakeside and I don't see Joan Ellis, it makes me a little sad. If I'm up on the hill, I make sure that I make it over to Dixie and give her a hug. And when I say it's sad, what I mean is I just don't see any of those legends coming up. That's what makes me sad. We had staples in the racing community in Kansas City that that I just don't see that. Somebody needs to step up and be that, if that makes sense.
no, that makes perfect sense.
And what's your
And I agree with you.
Yeah, it's like I said, I mean, everybody knows who's sitting in section D at 3 rows down. It's the Davis family or whatever it is. But there used to be those, like I said, there was just, and maybe it's the culture and maybe it's the way the world is today. But boy, those icons, those guys. I mean, you would see Joan walk up that to go to the suite at Lakeside, and if she didn't get hugged 20 times getting there, because she was a patriarch. I mean, she truly was the patriarch, and it, like I said, it's just sad to see that we don't have that again, but we'll get there. Hopefully. I mean, things are changing in racing. If you had to pick one story from either Riverside or Old Lakeside that you think people don't know about, what would it be?
Riverside, here's my one story. This is me as a kid. We were not a big drinking family, but the one thing I will remember of Riverside forever is the sound of a beer can hitting the, I can't think of the word now, but anyway, underneath, people would drop their beer cans. They'd slide down and go, shh, boom, and they'd all be caught in the same area. I will never forget that sound. And the other thing is, if you didn't sit about 10 or 12 rows up, you always got mud on you, no matter whether you were on the straightaway or in the turn. Uh, the mud would come flying during hot laps. Lakeside, well, the one story I will tell you is, um, and it has nothing to do with the racing, it has to do with the racers. But in the 1987 season, we sat behind Julia Deckman all year long, kind of got to know her. Because, see, Billy and I went to school together. Billy was 2 years older.
Mm-hmm.
I rode to school with him twice. If my parents would have known that, I'd have probably been grounded forever. His back seat was a milk crate. Uh, and it was a nice Mustang, and it went fast. But anyway, we sat behind Julia Deckman that whole year, and by the end of the season, here comes a baby, and that's Jacoby Deckman. And that's when you start realizing racing is family. Of course, the next year, once what I crossed the fence, I bought the race car, I started racing. Um, July 2nd was supposed to be our first race, and it got rained out. So July 3rd, we go to Riverside. I draw the pole for the heat race, the sixth heat race, and I go into the turn, very first race, go into the turn at Riverside in turn one, and the steering wheel was hitting my belly. So I went from first to last on the first turn, and then I thought, boy, I'm embarrassing myself. And then I got the hang of it. It's, wait a minute, you've seen these people do this for years. Turn left, turn right, turn left, turn right, go through the turn, step on the gas. So they never lapped me, and I considered that a victory. That was my first race at Riverside. And then the following weeks, I was at Lakeside every Friday night. And I'll never forget finishing fourth in the B feature to make the A feature. That was a victory for somebody that was starting. So those are
Yeah,
those are
it's
my
fun.
personal good stories.
It's funny how um, it is that simple. I remember my very first race was at Highland, Illinois, at the fairgrounds, and I started tailback in the heat race in an A mod. Um, didn't get lapped, so I thought, you know what, I'm doing okay. So I started on the pole of the B, and I was facing the wrong way at the flag stand by the time that one started. Um, and and I'm like, oh wow, what did I really get myself into? But then I remember at Granite City at Tri City Speedway, running the B, finishing. I think they were transferring 3, and I finished 3rd. And I remember some of the guys that my grandfather knew. Coming over and congratulating me for making the A, which was a huge deal. Um, you know, I'll say this. In Kansas City, I've had some really cool moments. Terry Watland was my flagman when I won my very first feature at Lakeside Speedway, which I thought was really cool. Mike Tanner was the first one to shake my hand when we got to Tech, which now that Mike's gone, really cool. Um, and for some reason, and maybe I'm looking at it wrong, and maybe it's not true, but I take those moments and put them into a database of just unbelievable moments. And I don't know if the younger crowd does that. Maybe I need to talk to them about that on some of these podcasts, because I've had some great interviews. The JD, you mentioned a couple people that you would really like to see on here. Is there a couple more that you think, man, because this is going to be an ongoing thing, and we'll start reaching out and making arrangements and seeing if we can get them on? Is there a couple more that you'd say, man, that would be a good interview?
Well, yeah, John O'Neill would be a great interview.
Yeah, John would be a great one.
But I want to mention a couple of people that also I thought could have made it to NASCAR during the asphalt years, let's put it that way. Aaron Daniels would be one, and Jeff Clem would be another
Mm-hmm.
one. And congratulations, Jeff Clem just got into the Carb Hall of Fame. I was happy to see that. So, because because Diana and I, back when we were racing, claimed one of Jeff Clem's uh, motors, and that's a story for another day. But it's got a hilarious ending to it. But I will tell you, when I got it home and took it apart, he was racing with a lot less motor than I was. Um, I had a lot better motor, but we put it in Diana's car. I will tell you, there's friends to this day that think I put Jeff Clem's motor in my car. uh-uh. It wasn't as good as the motor I had in my car. But
Well,
that's another day.
well, but that's kind of what sets racing apart is back in those days, everybody built their own stuff. A lot of claiming went on. So it was not uncommon to pull a motor apart and find that somebody had welded the main rods in so that, it just happened. I've seen it as a kid, because that happened a lot. And so it's funny to talk about those days and see the evolution. And man, I tell you, JD, we've been on it about 40 minutes now. We're going to get off here, but I'm excited for our next episode when we start talking about Lakeside Speedway from the 90s to 2015, 2016, when you left. That'll be a great conversation. Your new journey at I-35 will be another great conversation. There's just a lot of really cool stuff that's going on. And I will tell you, thank you from my side, because I have learned so much, as we said in the very beginning, about Kansas City racing. And I will tell you, as a retired racer, I take some pride that I was a racer in Kansas City, that I won some championships and some races, and because that's a pretty elite group.
It's a very elite group. I was just thinking, and I'll just throw this name out there because I know he's working at Talladega this weekend, but we have a NASCAR official that lives here in Overland Park, and Jeremiah Thalheimer, that came to us at Lakeside in 2014, worked at Lakeside 2014-15, and he is now a NASCAR official for Cup and O'Reilly. And so now I will tell you, you'll have to work a lot if you ever interview him, because he is your straight-laced NASCAR official, but you want an insider to all the stuff they go through and all the stuff they tech, he would be a great interview somewhere down the road. So, but that's the neat thing about Kansas City racing. We've had numerous people come through, and we have a great history.
Well, it's not just racers; it's the Kraft family, and making sprint car hoods. It's the Weld family, and Weld Wills. Yes, Kansas City by far is a hub of some of the best racing, along with just all the parts, everything that has evolved in Kansas City is pretty amazing.
It is.
JD, last question. Would you rather go to a race or watch the grandkids play baseball?
Well, if the truth is, at 68 years old, I'm going to tell you, I'd rather go watch the kids play baseball. I know I'm at the end of this thing. You start realizing life's short.
Yeah, that's for sure. Well, thank you again for coming and spending some time with me. I really, really appreciate it. We'll make sure we do a better job of getting it out so that people know that this show is coming. We're recording this on Saturday, the 4th. I'll be posting it on Wednesday of this coming week. And I want to thank so much. This is all possible by Rod End Supply. Brought to you by Rod End Supply. I want to thank them so much for coming on as our sponsor. Guys, we'll see you at the racetrack.
See you then.